The introduction clearly did not go well, and the pause lingered a bit too long. The two men were watching each other cautiously and intently. One of them, the older one with gray at the temples and a piercing gaze, was Mackenzie's father. Robert was the owner of a bank, and his entire appearance only confirmed his high social status. He wore a well-tailored suit, expensive brand-name watch on his wrist, and a trail of noblemen's cologne surrounded him. The second man, standing across from him, was still quite young. He was dressed very modestly, but his determined expression showed that he was far from shy. Although he wore inexpensive jeans and a simple shirt from a local market, the young man clearly possessed something that couldn't be bought with any amount of money, namely, a sense of self-worth. This was Jordan, Mackenzie's beloved. The girl sighed sadly. It wasn't how she had envisioned this meeting when she decided to introduce her boyfriend to her father. Hopes that everything would go quietly and peacefully were shattered, despite her attempts to mend the situation. The mutual dislike that had firmly established itself from the first seconds of their encounter was hard to overlook. Wisdom and experience won the duel of stares. "Well, young man, what is it that you do?" Robert inquired in a patronizing tone, continuing to scrutinize his potential son-in-law. "I work at a service station," the young man replied calmly, showing no embarrassment over his humble profession. "Jordan is the best employee. People come from all around, Dad, and even make appointments ahead of time." Mackenzie timidly tried to insert at least a word. But her father did not react to her comment at all, not even turning his head in her direction. Squinting his eyes, he continued the interrogation. "So, you're a worker. And you've decided to tie your life to my daughter, who graduated from music school, attended a foreign university, and spends more on cosmetics than you earn in a week?" "Dad, stop!" Mackenzie exclaimed angrily. But the young man did not flinch in response to such an overt desire to humiliate him, remaining completely composed. Of course, the lavish setting of his fiancée's home was overwhelming and impressive to an ordinary worker at first glance, but he knew what he was getting into and was prepared for such a conversation. "I understand your irony," he said, "but Mackenzie and I love each other. Truly. And I'm not going to settle for what I've accomplished. I have plans and I'm confident that I can support your daughter." "Plans?" Robert sneered in reply, "You need startup capital for plans. Are you hoping for the money from your rich future father-in-law?" The young man's patience was wearing thin. "I don't need your money," he declared. "I'll earn it myself, I promise." "What lofty words," the man exclaimed and continued, "I would love to know the last name of this future millionaire. I might miss an article about you in a magazine otherwise." "My last name is Garcia," the young man replied in a completely calm tone. At that moment, something unexpected happened. Robert froze in shock, staring at the guest with wide, astonished eyes. "Garcia? Jordan Garcia," he repeated, "did you grow up in an orphanage?" "Yes," the young man replied, surprised. "I ran away, though, 6 months before graduation." "How do you know? Did Mackenzie tell you?" Now Robert's face turned red. It seemed he was about to have a heart attack at any moment. "Dad! What's wrong with you?" Mackenzie rushed to him, frightened by his strange condition. But he quickly regained his composure, gently pushing her aside, and made his way to the safe. He took out a piece of paper and, with a malevolent grimace on his face, shook it in front of the young couple. "Here, this is a will, where almost everything goes to my daughter after my death. See this? Take a good look." They stared at him in confusion, waiting for further explanation. Suddenly, with a sharp movement, he demonstratively ripped the document in half, saying, "As long as you are together, you will get nothing from me. Not a single dollar." Mackenzie was in shock. She clutched her head and cried out in despair. "Dad! What are you doing? Are you out of your mind?" Her eyes filled with tears. Hurt and confusion reflected in her gaze. "What have we done to you? Why do you hate us so much?" But he continued to tear the paper into pieces furiously. The daughter only shook her head, realizing that further conversation was pointless. She looked at him sadly and quietly said to Jordan. "Let's go, help me pack my things. I don't intend to stay in this house any longer." She took her fiancé's hand and led him to her room. There, she grabbed a sports bag and began to frantically toss in the essentials. Jordan, overwhelmed by the lavishness of his fiancé's home, watched Mackenzie pack for a while, before he could no longer hold back and asked the question that had been bothering him. "Mackenzie, are you sure about what you're doing?" "Yes, absolutely," she replied, and suddenly turned to see her fiancé's expression. "Maybe it's you who are not sure you want to be with me. Now that I've lost my inheritance." "Well, what are you talking about? You know I love you more than life itself. I just don't want you to regret your decision later. You know I can't offer you the same quality of life." The girl embraced her beloved and looked into his big eyes. "Jordan, I'm ready to follow you to the ends of the earth." The sincerity of her words left no doubt. "We're actually heading there, to the ends of the earth," the guy laughed and exclaimed, "but if you're sure, then let's go." Her father nervously paced back and forth in the large living room. Seeing the young couple in the corridor with a big bag in their hands, he stopped and sternly warned them. "Mackenzie, you're making a mistake. Think it over. You can still stay." "I'm really sorry that you don't respect my choice, Dad," the girl said with regret. "I'm leaving. Goodbye." Still unable to come to terms with his daughter's newfound independence, Robert shouted after her. "Mackenzie, you can come back at any moment, but alone, without your fiancé. Then we can sort out the will. I don't need your money." "Not everything in life can be measured in money," she replied disdainfully. "Goodbye." Mackenzie remained silent the whole way. Her father's strange behavior saddened her. What had happened? What had triggered his outburst and aggressive reaction? She found no answers to these questions. This was the first time she had seen him like this in her life. He had never flaunted his wealth, and from an early age, Mackenzie had been taught to accept their comfortable lifestyle calmly. But at that moment, she regretted only one thing, that she hadn't had the chance to tell her dad the most important news: she was expecting a baby. Perhaps if she had confessed from the start, this ugly turn of events could have been avoided. But, sadly, it was already too late. Too much had been said and done, and Mackenzie had made her decision in favor of the person she loved. Therefore, the carefree, affluent life could be forgotten. Mackenzie had never imagined she would be practically homeless. For the first half of her life, she hadn't even suspected that a life different from hers existed. She thought poverty was something that only existed in fairy tales. As far back as Mackenzie could remember, she had everything. Her huge princess-style childhood room was filled with countless stuffed bunnies, bears, and dolls dressed in lace outfits. A soft pink canopy hung in delicate waves above her crib, and she felt like a fairy in a wonderfully magical world. Over the years, the room transformed into a modern teenage rebel's hideout. A sound system with speakers, posters of celebrities, laptops, phones, every type of gadget. She had all the latest trends. When Mackenzie returned home after studying abroad, she was met with a typical room in pastel colors, featuring a large mirror and a spacious closet, along with a small red car. Her father always anticipated her wants and spared no expense for her. Yes, she never lacked for anything, but since childhood, it was her same father who instilled in her the notion that everything must be earned. Good behavior, excellent grades, helping around the house, these demands seemed logical and quite manageable for the girl. Yes, it was her father who had always taken charge of her upbringing. He shaped her character. She could barely remember her mother. Only a vague image remained in her mind, along with the feeling of gentle, warm hands caressing her head. Every evening, her mother would sit at the edge of her crib, stroking her hair and telling her the next fairy tale about beautiful princesses, wicked dragons, and brave knights. And every time, goodness triumphed over evil, just as it should. "Mackenzie, I love you so much and I always will," the woman would repeat day after day. And then she was gone. It happened suddenly and quickly. The little girl didn't even have time to be scared or fully comprehend what happened. Only as she grew did Mackenzie learn that her mother had suffered from an incurable illness for several years. For 3 whole years, she and her father lived together. Of course, there were a cook, a maid, and a governess in the house, but none of them could even partially replace a mother in the girl's life. Eventually, the girl got used to this kind of life and, feeling the weight of responsibility, tried to fulfill the duties of the mistress of the large house. In the morning, she would see her father off to work, carefully adjusting his tie and smoothing his hair. In the evening, she helped set the table for dinner, arranged the utensils, and made sure her father was eating properly. But one day, completely unexpectedly for Mackenzie, Margot entered their lives. Still quite young, tall and slender, with bright, flamboyant makeup and a revealing neckline. It was not difficult for even a little girl to discern her intentions. Having gotten a hold of her husband's unlimited credit card, the young wife initially went wild. She spent entire days in shopping malls and returned home in the evening laden with numerous branded shopping bags, going through them in her room until nightfall. Her husband was amused at the sight of the girl's excited eyes and tried not to attach too much importance to her obsession. Margot had endured much hardship in her youth, living very modestly on the salary of a simple secretary. Mackenzie absolutely disliked her new stepmother. All her feigned kindness disappeared as soon as Robert turned away. In that moment, she became genuine, utterly self-absorbed. But the infatuated man didn't want to see any flaws in his chosen one, and his daughter didn't want to upset him. Thus, over time, an unspoken agreement was established between the stepmother and stepdaughter. They simply lived as if in parallel universes, allowing themselves only rare, exceptional jabs at each other. It was Margot who told Robert that Mackenzie should go study abroad. Apparently, this was her way of getting rid of her despised stepdaughter, hoping that the girl would marry and remain there forever. But her hopes were dashed. After diligently completing her studies, one fine day, Mackenzie appeared at the doorstep of her family home with a diploma in hand. Upon her return, Mackenzie continued to ignore the woman who wandered around the house in vulgar sheer outfits. She had entirely different concerns. Now, as a serious, qualified specialist, the girl came to work at her father's bank. He remained true to his convictions, reiterating the same requirements, to earn one's place in society and a high position. Therefore, despite her background, Mackenzie had to start from the ground up. In the beginning, she ran up and down the floors as an intern. Then she worked as an ordinary operator and cashier, and now she had progressed to a financial consultant. Mackenzie didn't take offense at her slow career advancement. She eagerly embraced all the nuances of her father's financial world. What was the rush? She had no need for money, and a thirst for power was not in her nature. One day, while returning home during a heavy downpour and low visibility, Mackenzie hit something and punctured a tire on her car. The road was deserted, and expecting help from passing drivers was a futile endeavor. Fortunately, there was a car service station nearby. A young worker, spotting the figure of the girl flailing about her car from a distance, quickly rushed over to help. His genuine smile and gray eyes immediately appealed to the girl. Looking into them, she realized her affection was reciprocated. That was how they met Jordan. The childhood and youth of her new acquaintance were drastically different from her own life. Jordan couldn't remember his parents at all. He had lived in an orphanage since he was 2 years old. He never liked that atmosphere. The boy always felt as if he was living someone else's life. The suffocating constraints of rules stifled his extraordinary personality and deprived him of peace. So, not waiting until his coming of age, Jordan simply ran away from there, thinking at the time that he was escaping to freedom. At first, he wandered the streets, slept at the train station, and almost fell in with a rough crowd. Strangely enough, it was an unexpected visit from the police that saved him from his first steps toward crime. His friends were taken to the police station, but Jordan managed to escape. After that, he happened to find a service station on the outskirts of the city. He arrived just as the busy season was starting and volunteered to help the workers handle the influx of customers. He carried wheels, lifted the jack, and tightened bolts. The clever and hard-working young man impressed the staff. Since then, he had stayed there. Jordan was allowed to sleep in the storage room. A comfortable fold-out bed in a cozy little room, interesting work with decent pay. A cafe with delicious food nearby, a forest within walking distance, and a bus to the city center every 20 minutes. What else could a young romantic, tired of the harsh constraints imposed by society, possibly need? He enjoyed this free life. Over the past few years, he had earned the respect and trust of his superiors. Gradually, he learned about car repairs and showed remarkable talent for the craft. Regular customers were already well aware of the skilled hands of the resourceful young master and preferred to be served by him. Then Mackenzie appeared. Amazing, refined, a real angel, every young man's dream. The only drawback was her social status. After all, she was the daughter of a banker. A boy from an orphanage, a hard worker and drifter without a home, was acutely aware that he wasn't the right match for such a girl. But she was so friendly and natural, unlike all those other upper-class people, and they enjoyed each other's company so much that the young man's hesitance gradually disappeared. At first, they were just friends. Sometimes, Mackenzie would stop by the station on her way home, and they would enjoy the famous burgers from the local cook and sip coffee from paper cups, chatting cheerfully and watching the passing cars. From time to time they met in the city, strolled through the park, rode the carousel, goofed around, and laughed. They laughed almost all the time, it felt so easy and good to be together. This friendship gradually blossomed into something more. That wonderful feeling, arising from deep within, made his heart flutter with every accidental touch, and at the first shy kiss, it raced wildly in his chest. Jordan vividly remembered the day when a completely bewildered and disheartened Mackenzie laid out a whole pile of pregnancy tests with the familiar double lines before him. That day clarified everything in their relationship. "Mackenzie, I love you, and I want you to always be with me," the young man declared firmly. Now it was her turn to respond. What was there to think about? Of course, she had had admirers before, but they were usually self-absorbed wealthy men, sons of rich parents. Yes, they took her to expensive restaurants and could shower her with gifts every day, but with none of them did she feel truly herself, the way she felt with Jordan. None of them could stroll barefoot along the forest edge with her, and no one could give her a world like he did every single day. What was left to ponder? Everything was decided between the two of them, definitively and irreversibly. The only thing was that Mackenzie's father opposed their union. Jordan felt a bit nervous. Bringing Mackenzie to his room was, of course, out of the question. Renting a nice apartment was also impossible. Fortunately, a friend of his had a small vacant apartment on the outskirts of the city. The neighborhood wasn't the best, but what could be done? Mackenzie had made her choice, and they needed to get accustomed to it. The main thing was that they were together. Crossing the threshold of their new home, Mackenzie held her breath, scanning the apartment with cautious eyes. The place had long needed repairs. Old, peeling wallpaper covered the walls, an old clumsy floor lamp sat next to a sagging sofa, a writing desk, and a wardrobe with a crooked door. Besides, it was clear that no one had stayed here for a couple of years. Everything around was covered in a thick layer of dust. Through the dirty windows, it seemed as if there was fog outside. Jordan watched Mackenzie's expression closely. He feared her reaction. After all, one could understand her. Her closet was almost the size of the entire apartment, and she had probably never seen such a dreadful setting in her life. Internally, he braced himself for her outrage, but Mackenzie surprised him. She carefully surveyed her new domain, gave him an encouraging smile, and went to look for a bucket and a rag. Jordan let out a sigh of relief. No, he hadn't been mistaken about this woman. She wasn't someone who could be easily broken, and that meant no circumstances would ever tear them apart. Together, they would overcome any difficulties and obstacles. He was ready to do anything for the girl he loved. Mackenzie even found the fuss of moving fun. Gradually, the filthy place transformed into a cozy apartment. Through the washed, sparkling windows, sunlight finally flooded in. It felt much easier and brighter inside. The unknown future no longer frightened her as it once did. Mackenzie continued working at one of her father's bank branches, but she was already looking for a suitable position elsewhere. To save money, she now took the bus. The only unsettling part was the unknown individuals who accompanied Mackenzie to the transport stop every day, trying to do so unnoticed. However, it was impossible to fool an observant girl. The situation was tense, and it was hard to say how it might end if one day, Mackenzie didn't spot a familiar giant figure in a gray suit slowly following her. It was Hunter, her father's security chief. Spying. That was something new. Her dad had completely lost his mind. A plan formed instantly in her head. Mackenzie ducked around a corner and stopped, hiding and waiting for her awkward pursuer. Hunter didn't expect such a trick and fell into her trap. When he met the object of his assignment, he halted and smiled, confused, realizing what had happened. "Mackenzie, good afternoon," he said in a conciliatory tone, trying not to meet her gaze. Hunter, what is this circus?" the girl exclaimed indignantly. "We've known each other for years. If you need to know my whereabouts, just ask. I'm not hiding anything." He sighed heavily in response to her quite reasonable protest. "Sorry, Mackenzie, it's my job. I was ordered to keep an eye on your boyfriend and just watch you to make sure nothing bad happens." "Jordan." "Why?" she asked, surprised. He shrugged, puzzled. "I don't know. He doesn't raise any suspicions." Such conditions of spying upset Mackenzie. Why did her father hate her fiancé so much? What did he suspect him of? The guard's next comment interrupted her thoughts. "By the way, Robert really wanted to meet and talk with you privately." Remembering the recent scandal her father had caused, Mackenzie grew furious and snapped. "I've already heard enough nastiness from him in our last meeting. That's enough. I have no desire to see him again." Hunter nervously blinked, but he continued to softly insist. "Mackenzie, your dad hasn't been looking well lately. He's been very upset about your leaving, but his pride prevents him from openly admitting his mistakes. You know him." Yes, Mackenzie knew. Her father hated being wrong and detested losing. She sighed. How fortunate that she hadn't inherited his phenomenal stubbornness. Her heart ached with sympathy for her father, who was suffering from his complicated nature. Who else could help him if not his own daughter? "All right, Hunter. Please tell my father that I will meet with him." Robert chose their favorite restaurant for the meeting. When Mackenzie was a little girl, he had brought her here, gallantly helping her sit at a table by the window and allowing her, as a grown-up, to order whatever she liked for both of them from the menu. She vividly remembered how excited she felt reading the names of the dishes aloud to the waiter, having been entrusted with such an important task. Yes, those were wonderful memories from a far-off, happy childhood. Her father was already waiting for her at that same little table. His furrowed brow and gaunt face caused her great concern. It was only now that the girl noticed how much he had aged in recent years. Mackenzie's heart literally ached with anxiety and unbearable sorrow. Seeing his daughter, Robert stood up, smiling apologetically. That smile was enough for Mackenzie. She understood that she wouldn't hear any words of apology from him and had long come to terms with that fact, but she was mistaken. "Mackenzie, forgive me, my dear, I made a big mistake out of emotions," he mumbled quietly, looking at the floor. "Daddy, what's wrong with you?" the girl asked, genuinely surprised. "I've never heard you say you were sorry before." He sighed and, still trying to avoid her gaze, spoke. "There are reasons for that, but let's go in order. Right now, I want to tell you a cautionary tale. Long ago, when Mackenzie was just born, the young and enterprising Robert decided to take a risk with his friend Damien and burst onto the emerging market of financial services. They put in equal shares and founded a new bank. Organizing the business was not easy, but with his economic education and great determination, they managed to tackle this challenge successfully. Things were going quite well. They could have lived happily ever after if not for one incident. Suddenly, Damien found himself in trouble. Some mysterious, suspicious people began to threaten Robert's friend. Surprisingly, Damien didn't seem to react to the dangerous situation at all. He merely refused his business partner's suggestion to go to the police. He was convinced that nothing serious would happen, that they would get tired of threatening and disappear. The key was to not be afraid and not give in to blackmail. However, the carefree idea of simply distancing himself from the problems proved to be a grave mistake and ended in a terrible tragedy. One day, in the middle of the day, on an isolated stretch of road, bandits opened fire on the car where Damien was traveling with his wife, and then fled in an unknown direction. The criminals were never found, and the deceased couple had no close relatives, leaving their only 2-year-old son all alone. Robert was suddenly burdened with a heavy weight of responsibility, requiring immediate decisions on several important matters. The man spent several nights pondering the dilemma of what to do with the unfortunate boy. His conscience incessantly urged him that the right decision would be to adopt his deceased friend and partner's son, but the temptation of taking the second half of the business for himself and not needing anything else tormented him. A heavy moral choice lay before him. In the end, reassuring himself with the thought that the criminals could continue to hunt down the deceased Damien's offspring and that could bring trouble to his own family, he decided that it would be better and safer for the little boy to go to an orphanage. The belief that he was saving his own relatives, his wife and daughter, gave him solace for many years after this decision, drowning out his inner voice of conscience. The last name of Robert's former business partner was Garcia. The son, deprived of his inheritance and fated to live in an orphanage, was named Jordan. "Dad! How could you?" the shocked daughter exclaimed after hearing this story. The man looked at Mackenzie with sadness. "If only you knew how hard this decision was for me. At that time, I thought I was doing the right thing." The girl still couldn't believe what she had just heard. Cradling her head in her hands, she looked at her father with wide eyes filled with disbelief. "But why did you tell me this at all? You could have continued to keep this a secret." Robert sighed heavily and gently took her hands into his. "You're still too young, my dear. Only with years and experience do you come to understand that you have to pay for every decision or action sooner or later. Do you see what happened to me?" he said with a sad smile. "Many years ago, I betrayed my friend and condemned his son to a life of poverty. And now, as if to mock me, fate brings my only daughter to him." "Daddy," the daughter said quietly, "it's still not too late to make things right. Maybe Jordan's presence in your life is a chance for redemption." "Yes, of course, it's necessary to correct mistakes," the father agreed, "but everything has already been decided for me." "Up there," he said mysteriously, swallowing hard against the lump in his throat, "the thing is, Mackenzie, I don't have much time left. I'm sick, and the doctors say I have no more than 2 or 3 years to live. That's my payment. How can this be?" Tears streamed down the girl's cheeks. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" The father stood up and tightly hugged his weeping daughter. "I only found out recently, my dear. What can be done? We just have to accept it and live the rest of our lives with dignity." The girl buried her face in her father's shoulder and sobbed. The man tenderly ran his hand through her silky hair, just like he did when she was a child. "Don't cry, Mackenzie, perhaps I'll still get to attend your wedding." "Daddy," she suddenly remembered, lifting her tear-streaked eyes to his. "I never got to tell you last time. I'm pregnant. You're going to be a grandfather." The man gasped and pulled her even closer. "Well, I would like to meet your Jordan. We have much to discuss." At the taxi, they stood in silence for a few minutes, simply hugging each other, just like after her mother's death. Two beloved people, whom nothing and no one could quarrel or separate. "Go on, my dear," the father whispered in farewell. He smiled encouragingly and lovingly kissed his daughter on the forehead. "I'm expecting you and Jordan for family dinner tomorrow evening. Please don't be late." For some reason, Mackenzie felt a pang in her heart at the muted tone of his voice. She hugged her father one more time and, summoning her strength, got into the car. But tomorrow never came for Robert. In the morning Margot called to deliver the terrible news. Mackenzie's father had died during the night from a heart attack. Mackenzie froze with the phone in her hand. Just the night before, she had been pushing away the strange premonition that their meeting would be the last. Margot organized a solemn funeral. The widow herself looked quite striking in a form-fitting black lace dress, a stylish hat, and oversized sunglasses. It was rather strange, considering the recent events. The woman accepted condolences with pleasure. Like a famous actress, fanning herself with a morning fan, she loudly thanked the guests who had come to bid farewell to the deceased. To outsiders, it could have even seemed like she was attending some sort of social event. Mackenzie and Jordan stood a little aside. The girl was repulsed by her stepmother's behavior, and she didn't want to talk to anyone. Leaning on her beloved's shoulder, she mournfully looked at the lifeless body of her loved one. Her soul felt utterly empty. The only thing that lingered was the feeling of regret for the irretrievably lost time that could have been spent with her father. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she talked to him in her mind, "I should have told you so much more, how much I love you, how grateful I am for everything. Forgive me." After grieving for a while longer, Mackenzie wiped her tears and decided that it was time to return to normal life. She couldn't allow the family business to run itself and let the bank, her father's life's work, collapse under the weight of circumstances. Mackenzie knew for certain that her dad wanted her to run his affairs and had always prepared her for this responsible position. But she was in for an unpleasant surprise. Margot suddenly announced that she had found a second will in the safe, in which Mackenzie's father had transferred everything to his lawful wife. Mackenzie's name wasn't even mentioned. There was no doubt about it, the document was authentic, and the lawyer confirmed Robert's signature. But how could this be? When did he manage to draft such a will? Why did he exclude his own daughter from his business? And what would happen to the bank now? There were no answers to any of these questions. In complete bewilderment, Mackenzie turned to Hunter, the head of security, hoping he could clarify this confusing situation for her, as her father had trusted him immensely. He was silent for a moment, biting his lip, but then he decided to speak up. "Well, I suppose it's okay to say now. Robert and his wife had been fighting constantly for the last month. A couple of times, I even heard him mention divorce. I can't understand how such a will could come about. It's all quite strange and suspicious." The news weighed heavily on Mackenzie's heart. But what could she do? The law is the law. She needed to quietly start collecting her things from her childhood home, which had now become foreign to her. From a phone conversation, she learned that Margot had gone to the beauty salon for the entire day. "You can come by this evening for your things," she said in a satisfied tone. "Well, certainly not," Mackenzie thought, "I don't have time to wait for you to finish at the salon." The door was opened by Leah, an elderly maid who had known Mackenzie since she was a child. "Mackenzie, dear, come in," she exclaimed happily. "Will the mistress be angry?" the girl joked. Leah grimaced, making it clear how she felt about Margot, and let the late master's daughter into the house. Inside the room, Mackenzie was met with peace and tranquility. Everything was in its place. For a moment, it felt to her as if she had returned to the past, and nothing had changed outside of that room either. In just a few moments, her father would knock on the door and call her to the dining room for lunch or invite her to the yard to play badminton. Mackenzie sniffed and sank into an armchair. Memories flooded over her. Noisy birthday parties that her father had thrown for his beloved daughter. Or the quiet evenings when the head of the family checked the bank's performance statistics on his computer in his study, while Mackenzie was allowed to quietly sit in the corner of the sofa with a book in her hands. From time to time, she would pause her reading and observe the taut expression on his face, noting the developing wrinkle between his brows. When he caught her gaze, he would turn his head and wink cheerfully at her. Those were the warmest and coziest moments. They formed the essence of happiness. But not everyone knows how to appreciate them. People anxiously flit about in search of it, while it's right here, nearby. They just need to stop and look more closely. A sharp, sad sigh escaped Mackenzie's chest, and a tear slipped down her cheek. She wanted to rush to her father's office to breathe in that familiar scent once more, still lingering in the house's atmosphere. Soon everything would change here. But the office door was locked. Chills ran down her spine. Mackenzie's father never locked it. In a house where everyone was family, that was unacceptable. However, the door next door was slightly ajar, as if inviting her in. It was Margot's personal room. Some invisible force pushed the girl forward. Her legs crossed the threshold on their own and carried her inside the room. This was her first time in here. She immediately sensed a sharp, cloying scent of some sweet perfume. On the shelves stretching along the walls was an endless array of bags and pairs of shoes in all shapes and colors. 1,000 tubes, boxes, and jars of expensive cosmetics lay before a mirror. Right there stood a mobile rack adorned with incredible outfits covered in rhinestones. The entire atmosphere of the room resembled a maniac fetishist's crypt or the dressing room of a famous pop star. Yeah, Margot won't be able to stretch their inheritance from Dad for long, Mackenzie thought, smirking. Her attention was drawn to a small table in the corner of the room. An item of some intricate shape was covered with a scarf. With one swift motion, Mackenzie pulled off the lightweight fabric, revealing a strange device with a mechanical arm holding a ballpoint pen. Upon closer examination, she recognized that she had seen a similar device in an advertisement. It was a handwriting printer that could copy and reproduce any handwritten text, even a person's signature. Next to it lay an incomplete box of ampoules containing medication. Leaning in closer, the girl read the label. The information from a detective novel she had recently read flashed into her mind, where the protagonist had been poisoned using precisely such a drug. Its effects could easily be mistaken for a heart attack. A horrible realization sent a shiver down Mackenzie's spine, followed by a wave of heat. Everything inside her tensed, making it hard to breathe, and darkness crept into her vision. A frightening thought crossed her mind, oh God, could this really be true? Quickly saying goodbye to Leah and sitting in the driver's seat of her red car, she immediately dialed Hunter's number. Only her father's loyal bodyguard and good friend could help in such an unbelievable situation. I need to talk to you urgently, she mumbled instead of a greeting. Upon hearing her trembling voice, he instantly grasped that something terrible had occurred. Come to my office, Mackenzie, I'll be waiting for you, he replied, alarmed. After carefully listening to Mackenzie's account of her astonishing discoveries, the man pondered, anxiously pacing his office. There was a lot to be astonished by. After all, he had seen a great deal in his life, especially in his younger years when he worked in law enforcement. Husbands and wives, distant relatives willing to do anything for financial gain, but proving the crime was a much tougher task than making an accusation. It's good that you left everything in place and told no one but me, he praised Mackenzie, adding, I think we'll need to contact my friend, a police colonel. He'll advise us on how to proceed correctly and help us navigate this case within the bounds of the law. An elderly man with a wrinkled face, the cemetery watchman, waved his hand toward graves overgrown with bushes. Here they are, Garcia. No one has come to visit since the common monument was erected 20 years ago, he lamented. I clean up sometimes, but I don't have the strength for all the neglected graves anymore. With that, the old man turned and slowly trudged back to his shed, leaving the young man alone with a large bouquet of flowers in his hands. People often come here to talk to the dead, and it's best not to disturb them. In faded portraits, a young couple, still relatively young, smiled at Jordan. He struggled to suppress the nervous tremor in his knees and stepped closer. Here they were, his father, dark-haired and slender, tangled up in his past for which he paid a heavy price, and his mother, a round-faced blue-eyed blonde, a true beauty who became an innocent victim of crime due to her husband's carelessness. Jordan closed his eyes and shook his head, trying to push away those grim thoughts. No one knows what truly happened, and nobody knows for sure who is to blame. Even Jordan, son of his deceased parents, has no right to judge them. He himself almost made the biggest mistake of his life once. Who knows how his fate would have turned out then? It's easy to make a mistake. Very easy. "Hello, Mom and Dad," he said loudly, and immediately felt awkward. How can one talk to stone? To an outside observer, he might seem insane. This thought made him look around, but there was no one. Only the lonely voice of a bird hidden in the thick canopy of a large tree and the rustle of the leaves of a nearby maple could be heard. Jordan turned back to continue examining the faces of his parents in the photographs. A strange feeling enveloped the young man, as with each passing minute they seemed more and more familiar to him. Maybe it's just a simple game of his imagination, but their smiles shifted from sorrowful to encouraging, as if they wanted to say something. "How glad I am to see you, son," seemed to say the calm and clear gaze of his father. His mother's eyes literally glowed with happiness. "Jordan, thank God. You're all right. I love you, my son. Don't forget us. Come to visit us sometimes." A completely incredible thought pierced the young man's mind as if it had gone right through him. "Oh God, they are alive, alive in my head, alive as long as I think of them." A gentle breeze playfully tousled his hair, as if a loving hand tenderly stroked his head for the right guess. "Right, right, everything is right." An enormous wave of emotion suddenly crashed over the young man. His heart clenched, and his knees buckled. Weary, he fell to his knees, covered his face with his hands, and leaned over the graves. "Mom, Dad, I love you so much. How I miss you." For the first time in many years, he cried. He vividly remembered the last time he let his guard down. At 5 years old, he had scraped his knee, and the older kids made fun of him, taunting him in every way possible. Since then, he had sworn never to show his vulnerability to anyone, but now was a completely different story. Pain flowed from deep within him, not physical but emotional, manifesting as rare, manly tears on the outside. Jordan took a deep breath and felt the tightness in his chest that had been tormenting him for years suddenly vanish without a trace. It was even easier to breathe. Looking around, he headed toward the caretaker's shed to ask the old man for some cleaning supplies. It wasn't right to leave the graves in such a state. 2 hours passed while he cleaned. A voice from behind pulled Jordan away from his task. "Excuse me, can I take some candy?" A skinny girl of about 10 years with freckles stood behind him, wearing an old dress. "Of course, help yourself," the young man replied, stepping aside. The girl efficiently gathered candies into a bag that was already half full and looked curiously at the tombstone. "Are those your mom and dad?" she asked in a completely innocent tone. "Yes, those are my parents," he confirmed. He glanced at the stranger's outfit again and asked, "And where are yours?" She shrugged vaguely. "I don't know. I've never seen them. I've lived in an orphanage my whole life," the girl explained, "over there, on the hill." She waved her hand, indicating where she had come from. Jordan nodded toward the bag in her hands and smiled, asking, "Won't your teeth hurt from so much candy?" "It's a lot for you." She just laughed in response. "Oh, please, I'm not alone, there are about 40 little ones with us." Jordan couldn't help but recall his own joyless childhood. Everything was by schedule. The food was bland and tasteless. Candies were only given on holidays. It was no surprise that the children ran away and loitered in the cemetery, seeking some way to sweeten their existence. The girl turned and headed toward the exit. Only then did the young man notice that she was walking with a pronounced limp. It seemed to be a result of a birth injury. "What's your name, little benefactress?" he called after her. She turned and cheerfully replied, "Kimberly." The image of the skinny, limping orphan who took care of the younger children lingered in Jordan's mind. In her deep eyes, he saw his own childhood pain, which remained an invisible scar on his heart forever. Children can be very cruel, he knew that from experience. Perhaps this limping girl was bullied by her peers in the orphanage. That's probably why she spent time with the younger kids, who were far kinder. Mackenzie listened with interest to Jordan's story about his visit to the cemetery where his parents rested and his touching encounter with the orphan, and once again amazed her husband. "How about we visit that orphanage next weekend? Let's bring some sweets and gifts and meet Kimberly." The young man embraced his wife. Even though they had just recently married, it felt as if he had known her his entire life. However, time and time again, he discovered new virtues in her. Like a precious gem, she revealed previously unknown facets, astounding him with the brilliance and beauty of her soul. Gazing into her clear, kind eyes, he admired the amazing inner strength hidden within that fragile body. "Mackenzie, you are my dear. You understand me so well." "Thank you, my love." "Are you going to work again?" she asked regretfully, noticing he was getting ready to leave once more. "But it's Sunday." He sat down beside her and patiently explained, "Mackenzie, you know my new job requires constant oversight." "I promise, I'll be back early today," he added, gently kissing her forehead as a farewell. "You're talking just like my dad." Well, how he used to talk, the young woman thought to herself. Not long ago, Jordan had received an excellent opportunity. The owners of the technical station where he had worked for the past few years decided to move abroad and agreed to rent their property to the most promising employee at a low cost. Jordan was thrilled with the idea. He knew everything well here and was quite skilled. From his very first steps in this business, he discovered a talent for entrepreneurship. Business was going even better than ever. He managed to increase the flow of clients, and even the cook in his small cafe had to bring on several assistants to keep up with serving guests. Of course, now the young couple saw each other less often, but such passion for his beloved work couldn't help but please Mackenzie. Every person has the right to realize their abilities for the benefit of society. Jordan, for instance, helps fix cars, which are indispensable in the frenzied pace of the modern world. Hundreds of children's eyes watched with admiration and curiosity as the two new visitors unloaded boxes of toys, books, and sweets from the car. More and more children flocked to them, forming a buzzing crowd in eager anticipation, like a swarm of bees. The director of the orphanage darted around the sponsors with excitement, constantly expressing her gratitude. Jordan scanned the crowd of children for a familiar face and waved. "Kimberly. Why aren't you saying hello? Don't you recognize me? I brought some candy for the little ones." And more. The children looked back in surprise and parted, while the shy girl hesitantly approached, swaying slightly. "I remember you well," she said with a voice ringing with excitement. "I even brought flowers to your mom and dad, daisies from the field, to make it pretty for them." At those words, Jordan felt his heart tighten. A little kind soul. How he wished that the system and society hadn't broken her amazing, delicate spirit as they often do. Instead, it would be wonderful if they could preserve and cultivate such kindness and thirst for beauty. Yes, those like her might live more difficult lives than others, but it is thanks to them that there remains hope for humanity's preservation in this crazy, cruel world. "Meet, Kimberly, this is Mackenzie, my wife," the man said, gently nudging the hesitant orphan closer to his wife. The girl reached out her hand in greeting and stared at the young woman's rounded belly. With childlike innocence, she suddenly exclaimed, "Oh, are you going to have a baby soon?" The soon-to-be parents laughed and nodded their heads happily. "I love babies." Kimberly smiled and even hugged her hands to herself, showing how she would embrace an imaginary child. Her eyes literally sparkled with happiness at that moment. Looking into them, one could see unconditional, all-encompassing love for everything and everyone, and forgiveness for past grievances, a capacity only a pure childhood soul could have. At the court hearing, Margot behaved outrageously. She screamed hoarsely, hurling curses at Mackenzie, and then burst into laughter. Perhaps she was belatedly trying to feign madness to escape accountability for her horrific crimes, or maybe she simply could no longer contain herself and was showing her true nature instead of pretending to be a lady from high society. But such behavior had the completely opposite effect. None of those present felt the slightest sympathy or pity for the defendant. With an impassive expression on her face, Mackenzie observed her stepmother's disgusting behavior. Now she understood everything. After the scandal instigated by Mackenzie's father, Margot pieced together the torn document and decided she deserved a larger share of the inheritance. When she commented in a discontented tone about her claims to her husband, she met with an aggressive refusal. Robert, still emotional after his daughter's departure, finally voiced all of his grievances toward his wife, which had accumulated over the years. And for her utter selfishness, her unwillingness to bear a child, and her thoughtless $1 million spending on clothes and cosmetics. It was then, harboring resentment in her heart, that the woman devised a plan to rid herself of her strict husband and the bothersome stepdaughter all at once. Of course, on her own, with her limited mind, she wouldn't have been able to handle such a task. With the help of an accomplice, who turned out to be her lover, Margot procured a potent poison and slipped it into her unsuspecting husband's food. The same accomplice suggested how to forge a will. Now he too had to sit next to Margot on the defendant's bench. The evidence of cold-blooded murder was overwhelming. Justice prevailed, and the guilty had to face their punishment. This, of course, pleased Mackenzie, but it could not bring back her beloved. The stress and physical strain of recent months had taken a toll on the health of the young pregnant woman. As she exited the courtroom, Mackenzie suddenly bent over and, in fear, clasped her hand to her stomach. "What's wrong with you?" Jordan rushed to her side, visibly distressed. "Doctor," she whispered with pale lips. Fortunately, an ambulance arrived just minutes later, but Mackenzie still had to be hospitalized. In the hospital corridor, Jordan was restless, pacing back and forth, his bewildered gaze following the concerned medical staff hurrying by. The worry and anxiety in his heart gave way to pangs of conscience. Why did they even attend the last court session? Mackenzie had been so upset. Lord, let everything be all right. A short elderly female doctor in glasses approached the future father, interrupting his thoughts. "Your wife's condition has stabilized, but there remains a risk of miscarriage. I'm afraid she will have to stay under our medical supervision until she gives birth." Upset by this news, Mackenzie sighed heavily and lamented. "Lord, how badly timed this all is. So many things left unfinished, both with the inheritance and the bank. Kimberly, the poor girl. She's waiting for us and believes in us, and here I am, forced to just lie here and stare at the ceiling." "Mackenzie, darling, don't say such things," Jordan replied sternly. "Your only and most important task right now is to think about your health and the baby. We can't take risks. The bank has a manager. I can handle some paperwork." "Don't worry," he reassured her, "everything will be fine." The woman gently squeezed her husband's hand in hers and looked at him with sympathy. "But you're almost always at work. Maybe you could quit. We really don't need anything." "Oh, come on, dear," he smiled warmly. "I promised your father that I would earn a living on my own. While I'm organizing everything, I'll have to work hard." Mackenzie looked at her beloved with a kind smile. At that moment, he reminded her so much of her father. Just as caring, balanced, and calm, but at the same time stubborn, insisting on his point of view. How she loved him. What a joy it was to have met him. Mackenzie arrived to pick up little Robert with Kimberly. The girl gazed admirably at her little brother and smiled. She simply couldn't contain her joy. Her lips spread into an uncontrollable smile of happiness. "He's so tiny," she whispered softly, examining the doll-like nose and tiny lips of the sleeping baby. The young parents watched their children and, with quiet smiles, thought almost the same thing. Here they were, small pieces of a vast world, a hope for a bright future. A girl with a kind heart and a little boy. Much depended on Mackenzie and Jordan in the fate of these children. Their task was to instill in them generosity and simplicity. However, the challenge lies in the fact that teaching this through textbooks and books is impossible. Only through their own example. After all, children always replicate the behavior of their parents, who, through their personal example, essentially help them carve out their own life paths. Each on their own small patch of responsibility, and on a grander scale, they shape the fate of humanity. This is why it is a tremendous responsibility and honorable mission to be a mom and dad.
Alright, everyone's presentations are done. Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, "I'm thirsty." Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children, with zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job, having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You're still saying that? Look at him." Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. "I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract?" Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. "Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go." Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. "Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him." There's no way he was pushed aside. "Don't make things worse here." "He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he?" I don't remember that part." I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.